Thanks for joining us for the North Bay podcast, where we explore how outdoor education is reshaping the way students learn, grow, and connect with the world around them. I'm your host, Rick Garber, and in each episode, we're going to dive into the impact of outdoor schools, the challenges and successes of bringing learning beyond four walls, and the movement to make outdoor education accessible to all. Welcome to the North Bay podcast. I have the great pleasure today of speaking with Peter Smerud from Wolf Ridge Environmental Learning Center in Finland, Minnesota. Pete, welcome.
Thanks, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So for people who are unfamiliar with the whole concept of outdoor schools, like just explain that to us. What is it?
It's an experience for children, typically middle school age, that they, with a group in a community of learners, often a class from school, so all the sixth graders or fifth graders, may then leave their home, travel to a destination, and for a multi-day overnight experience, 3-5 days, somewhere in there is very common, that they're immersed in learning outdoors all day long, every day. It's a lived, learned experience. It isn't just a field trip of an hour or two. They are immersing in a lifestyle of learning where it really is, we hear words of transformative or coming of age or rite of passage, that it's an experience that we know creates lasting change and is focused often on science and the natural world, but also on children becoming better versions of themselves, that they learn about themselves, then learn how they interact with their peers and how they can set goals in the future, what they care about, often what spark is ignited in them about something in the outdoors, in a stream or along the coastline or in the forest, that they leave changed in that way and they return home, and that learning in community really is something that is now a shared experience between this entire group of children.
Right. So why do you think that methodology, that having kids have this shared experience together in the outdoors, like why is that important?
It's especially, I think it's becoming more and more important. We all see it, that childhood is sadly an endeavor that's being turned more and more indoors.
Right.
And the criticalness now of enabling children to have safe experiences immersed in the outdoors is becoming more and more important, as disconnection from nature, as a lack of understanding to natural resources, of all these elements that children aren't getting.
Right.
And that for people my age, we grew up being kicked outdoors. My mother said, "You can't come home till the streetlights go on."
Right.
And that we all see that. And that screen time becomes issues for children where they will spend 10 minutes a day outdoors and they're on screens between school, social environments, that they can be on there for 7 hours in a day.
Right.
And so the act of creating that outdoor ethic and that connection is more important than ever right now.
So disconnection from the outdoors, but disconnection from each other too.
Absolutely. This learning in community, this shared experience between is elements that when I think about learning, what's the most effective learning is that's which retained for lifelong memory.
Right.
These are experiences that have lasting change on children. And we hear sometimes decades later of adults who can describe with vivid detail the insects they found in the stream, the first time they'd been in a night sky and they could see stars.
Right.
And that those experiences really create change, in part because you've got this deep emotional experience of leaving home, sometimes for the first time, for overnight, which can be kind of a scary deal.
Sure.
And that yet I can do this sort of wrapped in the security of my peers and my community, and that's something that is powerful. Really powerful for them.
So I can imagine, and I know from our experience at North Bay, that some folks feel that, this is just picking kids out to the woods. They're just going out to the woods and playing, and this is supposed to be part of the school day, right? We've got to prepare kids for tests. We've got to reach academic outcomes. When you were talking about playing till the streetlights, come on. I think about the free play that kids engage in and the opportunity for critical thinking, for kind of creating a rule set amongst each other and really developing skills in community. Can you talk about the importance of play and adventure in youth development and the opportunities for that in outdoor school?
And I think outdoor school often has that science component, and
Mhm.
yes, that's absolutely true. But it is this social and emotional learning environment
Right.
that, especially in this day and age, where we know children and are particularly really challenged and often suffering in some mental health challenges that are really
Right.
significant. That nature is the great healer, and so that to just be immersed outdoors and its in sense of play is again sharing that experience where one thing we know about children that and often adults
Mhm.
is how we play is how we live.
Right.
And the behaviors we exhibit in play often are the behaviors that might mimic us in the workplace
Right.
or in other environments.
In school.
And so
Mhm.
that act of being outdoors can feel a sense of respite and renewal and connection for a child, but then they can learn in a social emotional environment how to lift each other up, how to engage more deeply and trust and build friendships and relationships
Right.
in a day and age where it's very easy to sit on a screen and feel like I'm socializing,
Right.
but no, that's not. And that act of where there is just us in the outdoors, there are no other outside influences coming in. That really does create an environment that can
Mhm.
enrich children to be better people in society
Right.
and can set goals more effectively and can persevere
Right.
through challenge to get to that achievement that they
Right.
hope or wish for, even in the vulnerability of their
Mhm.
peers,
Yeah.
that and the presence of that to learn those skills and at times to define where the line may exist and where no, this isn't something for me.
Right.
And I have
And that's okay.
confidence and I can dare to say no.
Right.
And I know how to manage that because that's what's important to me, and yet I can do that within my peer group.
Yeah. So I think I know at North Bay, the adventure elements, the adventure of just being in the woods is a challenge for kids, and I think these things really build resilience. As kids are able to see challenges, understand them, internalize them, and pick a path forward, right? And for us, I think one of the greatest challenges, and you hit on it with the residential component, the overnight component of this program. One of the biggest challenges for kids is maybe their first time away from home. They're together with a group of kids in a cabin, and they're developing a community and a rule structure and a support structure for one another that maybe they haven't done before.
I think you hit on it, that pick a pathway forward. And what is that
Mhm.
pathway? What do I really value in the world? How do I want to get there? And it takes more than just me. There's strength in the fact that an experience at Wolfridge or North Bay or that in outdoor school, that it is children with their peers, but with their teachers, with parent chaperones. And it really does become that sense of community, and that it is a way to empower them to seek a path
Right.
and develop skills to reach the goals I have and the milestones along that pathway.
Yeah.
It happens here. We get to witness it on a daily basis, which is phenomenal.
Yeah. So, Pete, I'm hearing about the real value social emotionally about how kids develop in these programs and outdoor schools. Uh, what about the academics? I mean, academic performance is important. Academic outcomes are critical to participation in these things.
Outdoor schools are schools. They're places of learning.
Right.
And it isn't just in the personal, social, emotional, it's field science.
Mhm.
Many outdoor schools are field science education focused, and that it's facilitated learning. I think that's something an outdoor school does really well. That the concept of a teacher is really focused on a teacher centered environment where outdoor school educators facilitate learning for children. They facilitate learning where the child or nature is the teacher. I know indigenous peoples often it's learn from the chickadee, learn
Mhm.
from the trout. And that idea that how can we get children to really feel that sense of connection that is taken to this level of academic learning.
Mhm.
And we know that we see it routinely. At Wolfridge, you see children who don't necessarily do as well in the formal
Right.
classroom setting. And
Right.
they come out here and they are lit up. This
Mhm.
is their type of learning. This feeds their soul. This feeds their type of knowledge. And we know they return to the classroom more excited about learning.
Right.
They return to the classroom
Right.
doing better. That we know that children in nature do better on test scores.
Mhm.
That some of that just reducing that stress environment can then help them to excel in learning.
Right.
Children that often get sort of in the classroom that may huddle in the corner, that maybe not get the sort of attention from their peers, suddenly The
Right.
spark is lit, and
Mhm.
their peers see them in a different way. And so their academic performance is not only are they learning science and
Mhm.
environmental outcomes and things like that that may be in grad standards for natural history, natural science, but they're bringing that back to make better, knowledgeable
Right.
people in those subjects of social studies and science. And for schools, it's a way that they can contact hours aren't lost
Mhm.
coming to outdoor
Right.
school. They're really enhanced by coming to outdoor school because those subjects are brought in a really hands-on way to kids that the knowledge is gained. They can come back and perform well, better in the classroom than
Mhm.
they did prior to coming to
Yeah,
outdoor school.
it's not out of instruction time. The kids are in instruction time, and they're in it in a different way, and that facilitated learning model creates student engagement, creates ownership of education, and kids get excited and begin to really take a more active role in what their education is when they feel that ownership. We see that at North Bay. I know you see that at Wolf Ridge, and we see that in outdoor school programs everywhere.
And our the outdoor school programs are really well structured, that there's curriculum and lesson plans,
Mhm.
and there's outcomes, there's concepts,
Right.
and those are linked in many states to grad standards or to
Ab-
academic standards, and so that we know if they're taking a stream ecology class, they're taking a wildlife
Mhm.
class. And so for the folks in schools that are setting up the curricula, they're really creating a structural plan for a set of students through 5th grade or whatever the grade level may be that they can describe. I know for a school district that brings all of their 5th graders to Wolf Ridge, 11 of the 15 major benchmarks in these
Mhm.
standards in science are achieved
Right.
part by going to outdoor school.
Right. And one of the things that's so exciting for me about science instruction, particularly outdoor science instruction, is the ability to be cross-curricular and to bring in social sciences, to bring in ELA and mathematics and to have nature become the context for learning.
Exactly, that multidisciplinary
Mhm.
approach and the context that
Mhm.
it can inspire writing, it can inspire art,
Right.
and many outdoor schools are using those writing elements, art elements, social studies elements, science elements, natural science, physical science. And in a set of days, all of that occurs.
Mhm.
And yet the learning is from really the moment they awake to when they lay the head upon the pillow at the end of the day. And that is an amazing environment of learning where all of this, and I think to most folks, that feels real world.
Yes.
That
Yes.
the real world, I don't go and do just this thing for a period of time and return. My world is influenced by all sorts of change in a day, and that's life for a child in
And
outdoor school.
it's immersive.
Yeah.
It's immersive. Um, tell me about some stories. So give me some stories. I'd love to hear.
I've been doing this a long
You
time.
you have.
It's a joy. It's one of the great privileges of my role as a director at Wolf Ridge is that I get to hear often from people that are coming years later. Uh, and I think the people that do the work we do are typically optimistic,
Mhm.
looking to the future. And there's a group of 7th graders that came to Wolf Ridge from a suburb just north of Minneapolis, and they took a class where renewable energy was one
Mhm.
of the focal subjects. And these 7th graders went back to their teacher, their science teacher, and said, "Why don't we add solar power on our school, solar
Right.
panels?" I learned about solar at Wolf Ridge,
Sure.
and great science teacher said, "Oh, here's a lesson.
Right.
So, all right, kids, what would we need? Let's go talk to the head of maintenance. What are the electrical
Mhm.
loads for the building?" And they did all this research,
Yeah.
and they put together the plan. And they learned that this is what the building needs to go to
Right.
really a net zero environment. And they went to the school board and they presented to the school board their learning and said, "Here's the plan. Here's what we would need to change our middle school building to be this.
Right.
And we've done the research. This is what it would cost."
Mhm.
And in a public school board meeting, they pushed and asked the school board, "Can we do this?"
Mhm.
The school board as well, we don't have the money for that.
Right.
We don't have the money. And
Right.
they got the school board in that public meeting to say, "Kids, if you can find the money, of course we do
Of
that." The
course.
children said, "What was that?" "If you can find the money, yes, we would do that."
Right.
9 months later, the kids are back at the school board, donated union electrical labor,
Wow.
donated materials,
Wonderful.
donated cash and finances. And about 18 months later, after that first meeting, solar panels were going up on the roof of their building.
Wow.
Now, that was 15 years ago.
Mhm.
Fast forward to present, there are solar power generation on every building owned by that school district. And That county in Minnesota has the most per capita domestic solar production of any county in the entire state on people's homes,
Wow.
essentially.
And a group of kids in outdoor school.
Group of 12 and 13-year-olds in outdoor school have changed an entire culture
Right.
to look at a future that is moving to a cleaner, less fossil fuels environment, and a values move
Right.
that truly changed society in this. And we do it. If we show that it can be done for a week in outdoor school for a large group of children, and then they take it back to their community, that really, to me, it sort of embodies the story
Right.
that it isn't just an impact on a group of children. It really is an impact on a community, and they take that back with them.
Right. And that story really illustrates as kids go through a process of trying to create positive change in their communities, there's so much learning that's happening. They are doing civics, they are doing math, they are doing science, they are figuring out how to be a positive influence in the world. And they got that at outdoors.
Yet, another story that one of the stories I love is there is transformational change that we can see. And often when parents are coming with children, and in this day and age where more and more mental health challenges are really presenting themselves for all sorts of reasons, that these experiences provide hope. And things like adventure or games facilitation and play. A child on a ropes course who a lot of tears as they move through, but at the end they come down in tears, and the mother is watching.
Right.
And the child is, if I can do this, I can do anything.
Right.
And the mother comes over and hugs her child, and they are both bawling in tears. And the mother turns to me and says, "You have changed my son's life. This is a moment they will never forget." And you look at that, who could not want that sort of thing for their child, for their children in their community, for their neighbor? That it is powerful on an individual level, it's powerful on a community level.
So it's changing individual lives,
Yeah.
but those lives are changing communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Pete, many kids, I'm sure in Minnesota, certainly in Maryland, have the opportunity to go to a summer camp or have a camp experience. And those are great experiences for kids. What's the difference? What's the differentiation between an outdoor school and a camp?
Yeah, the culture's rich in Minnesota for sure, and it's phenomenal. I'm a product to that. I went
Yeah.
to camp as a kid, and I had that privilege and that access. And I think the difference is that camp is phenomenal at the social and emotional growth, and yet I often leave home by myself or maybe with one of my buddies, and that I go and learning might happen in that
Right.
sense of science or outdoors or things like that. Maybe the camp is a nature center, and it's a great environment for a child to grow in, and yet it isn't the facilitated learning. I mean, outdoor school really is a defining
Right.
component that helping and facilitating that learning for children to be better versions of themselves, facilitating the learning about the world and science, and that outdoor school has that intentionality as often is just sort of a little looser in a camp environment, and that the concept of coming with my peers and then taking it back
Right.
home. We often talk to children, and I can recall this as a child, who I was at camp was so phenomenal. I got back home and I didn't know how to apply all that back
Right.
into my world because it was really this thing I lived by myself. And outdoor school is so powerful because it has this individual growth and learning element that is really wrapped in this whole community of learners of my classroom, of my grade level, of my neighbors who are in my peer group down the street,
Right.
type of thing. And that we experience that together. And I get to take these lessons back home for me
Right.
and for my community of people.
Right. So when we have a group of kids in that intentional and facilitated learning model, they do have that shared experience that they bring back together. When you have students, sometimes families, and always teachers together, it's transformative for schools.
Outdoor school educators are really steeped in experiential learning theory. This idea that an experiential learning that where a teacher might teach a lesson and then say, let's go do something to demonstrate that you know or understand. It's flipped completely.
Right.
Is drop the child or the human being into the experience, and they might flounder a little bit and have to figure out their pathway through. And then there's an element of reflection. What did we
Mhm.
do here? What can we learn from this?
Right.
And then this abstract thinking. What can we apply in my real
Mhm.
world or back at home to the
Right.
stream or the lake or the pond nearby? And then what's the next question I want to ask? That learning model that spirals and grows
Mhm.
upon itself. I mean, that's a distinct difference between outdoor school compared to camp.
Right.
And that it is really taking these elements, reflection, and then with an abstract thinking to bring
Mhm.
it back home. And then to say, what do I want to know more about? What career might I now be interested in?
Right.
That blew my mind. I didn't know that someone could
Right.
make a living out in the forest working in these
Mhm.
sorts of environments or as an ecologist. That the career modeling for children in this environment, it opens them up to whole new worlds they didn't think
Yeah.
possible. And those elements of really that spiral sort of learning model that builds
Mhm.
upon itself, these are distinctions that outdoor school really holds different from almost anything else in society.
Yeah. S so outdoor school, I mean, we've been talking about youth mental health. We've been talking about disconnection from nature, disconnection from each other. These are problems that we see, they're prevalent in society right now. They were exacerbated by the pandemic. Outdoor school seems to be an answer. So, uh, how do we apply that? How do we get kids these experiences that can be a real antidote to that disconnection?
That it is amazing when you look coast to coast, north to south, all over this country. Outdoor school exists, but it doesn't exist for all.
No.
It is often sadly defined by what zip code you may live in. Do
Right.
I have this opportunity versus you or others?
Mhm.
And that this is a movement really across the country. And one of the things the pandemic did do is suddenly the outdoors became the safe place to
Right.
go.
Right. Right.
That don't gather indoors, gather outdoors,
Mhm.
be safer. And I think that there is a movement now that's growing on the heels of some of that, that we need to provide this for all children.
Right.
And that we know in many cases across the country in schools and in communities what the barriers are,
Mhm.
and we know what the challenges are.
Right.
And yet we have states in our country that have passed legislation. They've created outdoor school for all the kids of their state.
Mhm.
And that in those states that they are watching growth happen of more and more children.
Right.
And what might have been 25 or 30% of the kids in the state getting the opportunity now, age
Right.
a percent or more of the kids.
Right.
And that as we look to the future, we need to then be setting up our groups of children throughout the country to all have, because all kids are
Mhm.
suffering in that sense
Right.
of childhood being turned indoors and too much screen time and disconnection, that this is an answer to solve so many needs. And the National Alliance for Mental Illness is
Mhm.
supporting this sort of work, that parents get it, teachers
Mhm.
get it, administrators get it, and we just need to help them to get this for all the kids in
Right.
our country, to
Right.
really create outdoor school for all students, no matter where you live and from what background you come.
Right. A and I know that when we look state by state and we say only 30% of students, 40% of students are having these experiences, what we see are they're the affluent 30 to 40% of students
Yeah.
by and large, state by state. Outdoor school for all sounds like the antidote to that.
I mean,
It sounds like equity is achievable and real success is happening in some places.
there's data. We've got the data. We can look for all is the really the encompassing statement of equity,
Right.
that we don't have to talk about equity. If it is for all, then it is equitable. Everyone's got this opportunity, and there is data to reinforce that this is working.
Right.
And we have models we can turn to in this country, and it is something that all children need,
Yeah.
really. And we can be part of that change in the world that we want to see. Um,
We can move this from a privilege to a right together.
I think that says it all.
Pete, this was a great conversation. We're really excited at Outdoor School for All at the potential to bring real equity and change to communities, to provide these kind of incredible experiences for kids, and to have a partnership that stretches across the country with that goal in mind. I really appreciate you being here today.
Well, Rick, it's been a pleasure. And we're doing work that creates lasting change in society, and an equitable for all movement. It's proud to be a part of. and to work with North Bay and Wolf Ridge and all these other centers that are doing this work. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. That's a wrap for this episode of the North Bay Podcast. But remember, the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Outdoor learning is a movement, and we all have a role to play in making sure every student, no matter where they are, has access to the life-changing benefits of learning in nature. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to subscribe, like, and share the podcast with others who believe in the power of learning beyond the classroom. And remember, outdoor school shouldn't be a privilege for the few, but rather a right for every student. See you next time.